The first sermon I ever heard, the pastor preached out of, I think it's Psalm 68, and he said, God is a father to the fatherless. And man, that thing hit me because I didn't have a concept of God, but I knew I was fatherless. And so I was like, well, then who is God? Because I don't have a father, so who is God? And that placed me on the path to learning more about who God is and who am I in God and who is Jesus. And around the age of 12, I accepted Jesus as Lord of my life.
Tell people a little bit about what you do at Meta.
Sure. So first and foremost, I do not have a background in tech. The fact that I even landed at Meta is a God story in and of itself. I'll save that for another day. But currently today, my team supports houses of worship all around the world to ensure that the various tools and apps that Meta creates are meeting their needs and ultimately helping them build community. And I think we saw in the pandemic just how important technology can be to enabling us as Christians to stay connected to one another and to our local churches. And so that's a huge part of what my team does, is really think about, okay, what does the future of faith look like, and how can the apps and the products that Meta creates enable that for people of all faiths, but of course the church too.
Of course, on the faith side, I think it's amazing that Facebook, Instagram, that they're doing, stuff like this, because when I think about these companies, I think one, their goal is to make profits, and two, maybe they're bad for faith, or maybe they're bad for our morality. But then I hear that they're hiring someone like you. You're a pastor, you love Jesus, you're a Bible-believing, born-again Christian, you preach the gospel, and they want you to be a huge part of this faith thing. It's like a weird question mark in my mind,
Yeah.
like what?
Well, I will say this, I've talked with a number of pastors through the years, and they've expressed similar sentiments. And the thing I always like to tell people is, I wasn't hired in spite of my faith. I was hired because of it. Because I deeply understand what it is to be a person of faith and how important it is to connect with like-minded believers and worshipers, not only in your local church, but also around the world. And so, yes, that is to me, that's such a popular misconception, is that these companies, especially, Meta and Facebook and Instagram, that, they're not for the faith community, when in fact, there are thousands of Christians that work at this company, and there
are thousands of Christians like myself who utilize Facebook and Instagram to reach an audience with the gospel.
Absolutely.
And I do it. I think every pastor I know has a Facebook and an Instagram, and they use it to share their faith, to share their story, to share encouraging things. So it's cool to hear that there's some of that going on. Before we get too much into that, because I want to ask about how social media affects this comparison thing. Obviously it's something you're able to witness firsthand. I'd love for people to hear your testimony. You've gone through a lot of tough times. You seem like you are a super successful person, but people may not know behind the scenes some of the challenges that you've faced. And how did you come to faith?
Yeah, wow. I am a statistically improbable product of God's grace. I think a lot of times we walk into the successful chapter that a person's life is on, and we're like, oh, that must be their whole story. But, I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I didn't know anything about God, Jesus, Bible. We didn't go to church. As a matter of fact, my father passed away shortly before my second birthday, and my mother, she met a guy who became her live-in boyfriend, and shortly after he moved in, I was around 5 years old, he became sexually abusive to me. I'm an only child. And so there was a tremendous amount of trauma and pain that I endured. And I was around the age of 7 when I told my mom what was happening, and she had him arrested, and I thought everything was over. But on the day of his release from jail, she took me with her to pick him up and brought him back home. And the abuse resumed shortly after that. And around the age of, I think, 9, I tried to end my life. I didn't know what was on the other side of death, but, in my mind, it was better than whatever I was facing in life. And so that was unsuccessful. I tried again at the age of 11. That was unsuccessful. And shortly after that second suicide attempt, a classmate of mine in the 6th grade invited me to church. And, not knowing what it was, I was like, oh, we're going to go to her house, play a thing called church. I didn't know. And I'll never forget, Bobby, walking into the doors of that church, the people were so welcoming, and their smile was so genuine. And for the first time in my life, I really felt wanted and loved. You know, people should know that because of my trauma, I had acted out in school. You know, elementary school, I was labeled a problem child. I didn't know how to process what was happening to me, so I would act out. Middle school, similarly, was labeled a problem child, but that experience with that church community, it fundamentally changed the trajectory of my life. The first sermon I ever heard, the pastor preached out of, I think it's Psalm 68, and he said, God is a father to the fatherless. And man, that thing hit me because I didn't have a concept of God, but I knew I was fatherless. And so I was like, well, then who is God? Because I don't have a father, so who is God? And that placed me on the path to learning more about who God is and who am I in God and who is Jesus. And around the age of 12, I accepted Jesus as Lord of my life. And I remember the youth pastor at the time, he said to me, he said, Nona, you know, there's an anointing on your life. He was like, I don't know what God has called you to do, but I can tell that you've been set apart. And about 5 years later, I got licensed into the gospel ministry as a minister of the gospel. I started preaching at 17.
How many years later?
Yeah, it was 5 years later. I was 17 years old.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, I was preaching at all these like youth conferences, and even when I was in college, I was preaching. And so I just thank God for his redeeming power because you know, the last thing I'll say is I recently took an assessment. It's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Assessment. It's like a social services survey. And what it does is it looks at the probability that a child will have adverse outcomes in their life because of trauma. And that could be like drug addiction, premature death, incarceration. It's a scale of like 0 to 10. And you're considered high risk if you score a 3. I scored an 8. And so the fact that I'm sitting here with you, you know, I mean, I give God all the glory because it could have been so different. And that is not lost on me. And I thank God for his grace every day. The fact that I'm in ministry and my husband and I get to lead a local church together and I get to serve at this huge tech company and support houses of worship around the world and help other people connect to inspiring content. It's just such a gift every day. So
what an amazing story. I almost don't even know what to say to that, except I feel like if people are at home who've experienced that, and there are a lot of children who went through something like that. It's shocking and sad how many kids had to face that, and they carry it the rest of their lives. Like I'm sure you still carry it with you even today in many ways. And when I think about just a baby, I mean, like a 5-year-old, 7-year-old, picking up that monster again, and you're wondering why your mom would do that. You know, in this book, I love this book, Killing Comparison. You just come out with this, and you're talking about in our faith journey how we so often compare ourselves to others. Do you feel like some of the challenges that you faced when you were a kid, even though you came to faith, and even though you know Jesus, and even though you know that he loves you just as you are and not as you should be, that there was some other part of your life that you still felt like you had to prove yourself or that you never felt worthy? That's a big part of your story, isn't it?
Oh, 100%, Bobby. So as a matter of fact, one of the concepts I discuss in the book at length is the power of words. The words that are spoken over us, especially in our formative years as children, they fundamentally shape our understanding of our identity and who we are. I think we all know, you know, in Proverbs, there's the verse that says, you know, the power of life and death is in the tongue, right? But if you look at the Hebrew word that's translated power there, it's the word yad, which means hand. And so when you put it all together, it's really that in the tongue lives the hand of life and death. So the tongue has the power to shape. It has the power to mold. It has the power to create because it's like a hand. And when you think about a hand, I mean, a hand, it can build houses. A hand can create priceless works of art. But a hand can also destroy. A hand can kill. And so our tongue, the words that we speak, carry power. They carry the power to shape identity. And so for me, what happened to me as a child, you know, hearing my mother as an example, when I confronted her about the whole thing and I was just like, look, this really bothered me, she basically said it was my fault.
Wow.
You know, and hearing her say that, it fractured my identity. The hand of her tongue fractured my identity, such that I think as I reflect back on my life, the way that I saw myself was broken because I saw other people as more worthy than me. How could I be worthy? You know, my mother brought this man back who hurt me, and she said these very negative things about me and how it was my fault. And so, yeah, I do think that those situations and those experiences, they shape our identity. And when our identity is fractured, we begin to look externally at other people to figure out, where do I measure up? Am I as good as this other person, or am I less worthy than this other person? So, yeah.
I think there was a study that was done that said something like, all of us never compare down, we always compare up. So even if you're the CEO of a huge company, you're going to compare yourself to the CEO of a bigger company.
Yes.
You never compare yourself to a vice president, for example.
Yes.
Is that something that you've struggled with? I mean, you're obviously super successful. Do you still compare up, or do you ever find yourself struggling with that?
Here's why I love what you're saying, because something I realized as I was going through my own journey to get free from comparison is that success never has a period. It only has commas.
Yeah.
Because with every higher level of achievement, all you realize is that there's somebody who's achieved more, right?
Yeah.
You get more visibility into the fact that there are other people who have done more than you. And so, and one of the concepts I discuss in the book is this idea of insecure foundations. One of the revelations God gave me about insecurity is that even though as a society we tend to think it's a function of self-esteem, insecurity isn't about self-esteem. Insecurity is about identity. And fundamentally, it's a question of what your identity is secured to.
Okay.
So if you secure your identity to something that is insecure, something that is fickle, it's subject to the shifting opinions of people, you're going to be insecure. So in the area of, professional achievement, that's an insecure foundation. Because, to your point, let's just say that you aspire to one day become a manager. Well, you become a manager, then you realize, oh, wait, there's a director. You become a director, and then it's like, oh, wait, but there's a vice president. So then you become a vice president. Oh, wait, but there's a CEO. The CEO, bigger company. So it never ends. And there are people who they've retired from their career, and they feel completely lost. Why? Because they had secured their identity to the insecure foundation of their job.
At TBN, our mission is to use every available means to reach as many individuals and families as possible with the life-changing gospel of Jesus Christ.
Thank you for helping make the gospel of grace go around the world.
Without you, we couldn't do it. God bless you.